Hello, today for Motivational Monday, it's episode 496. Yes, we're approaching episode 500. Today, we're talking with Eric Sheninger about what's new in digital leadership version 2.
The 10-Minute Teacher Podcast with Vicki Davis. Every weekday, you'll learn powerful, practical ways to be a more remarkable teacher today.
Digital leadership. Eric Sheninger is with us today. And Eric, you've got a second edition of your book coming out. You know, how much did it change?
Oh my goodness, Vicki. It changed a lot. I mean, as I went through and looked at my writing, I'm like, wait a minute, did I write that? Or this didn't sound good. And I really took to heart a lot of feedback that I received either face-to-face or online on how to make the book better. So it is roughly 50% new content, updated research, and new resources to support all the ideas and strategies that are in the book.
So what was an example of something you knew you had to change?
Oh my goodness. You know, the whole book is based on the 7 pillars of digital leadership. And the first pillar was just, in my professional opinion and others, just not adequate enough. And that was the most important one, which has to do with student learning, engagement, and outcomes. There was such a heavy lift on talking about the pedagogical shifts that have to occur. Technology changes. Teaching, learning, and leadership need to change just as much. So in that chapter, I really expanded, how we need to take a critical lens to instruction, what the teacher does, and then learning what the kid does and how we shift that balance of power from instruction to learning. So I think that is probably one of the most significant upgrades to the book. There's lots of examples, some guiding questions, which really center around, when it comes to both with and without technology, are kids thinking, and how are they applying their thinking?
So you talk about a shift of a balance of power. Help me understand that.
Well, you know what? When a lot of us, we're kind of victims of our own practice. We teach the way we were taught. We lead the way we were led. And when we think about the classroom, whether it's from a teacher lens or an administrator lens, the go-to has been direct instruction. It's been teacher-centered. It really has been that either fear, inability, or lack of support to give up that control. So what we often see, even when technology is thrown into the mix more as a substitution tool, is still direct instruction. And there is nothing wrong with direct instruction. When you look at high effect size research from John Hattie, it's still a 0.6. But if we're really talking about learning, it's more what the kids are doing. And when we think about technology, the key question to ask is, how are kids using technology to learn in ways that they couldn't without it? So that balance of power has to be less us, meaning less adults, and more of our kids. We can talk about ownership of learning and empowerment, but what does that really look like? How does it manifest itself in the type of tasks kids are engaged in, the work that they produce, how we assess, and how we provide feedback?
And this is so right because, as I'll sometimes tell my students, I already know how to do that particular thing. I don't always just tell them. I'm not a Google, I want to guide them through that learning because if I help them discover it, they just understand it better.
Yeah, it's not about kids telling us what they know. And that kind of is sort of a outcome of the way education has been for so long. But it's moving from kids telling us what they know to showing us that they understand. And that really, I'd say, is the biggest shift throughout the book is how do we really get our kids to understand from a teacher point of view, but as administrators, how do we support our teachers and really begin to transform practice so it not only improves outcomes, but prepares kids for this very disruptive, dynamic world that we're now all a part of.
So those of us who've read your first version of digital leadership, is there anything that you just completely added to the book that just wasn't even really mentioned in the first one? And you're like, wow, this has to be here.
That is a great question. And my answer is A definitive yes. In the first book, it really was kind of based around my experiences and those of my teachers back at New Milford High School prior to 2014. So I did expand on some of the things that we did, but what I really saw was a sort of need to really talk more about the evidence that drives change, because success breeds success, Vicki, whether it's a differentiation or changing assessment or integrating technology in a purposeful way. People want to know, how can we do it in a practical way? And what is the evidence, whether it's research that supports this change, but the evidence that it's actually making a difference in teaching, learning, and leadership. So there is a whole new chapter on the topic of efficacy, the degree to which we attain the goals that we set out. So the last chapter kind of weaves everything together in terms of the 7 pillars that were discussed, the research that was presented, the evidence, and I kind of showcase how the ideas and strategies in the book have led to real improvement in schools. But you know what? It's not that we have to go all in on the research. It's not that we have to have evidence for everything, but it does have to be a part of the conversation. And we do need to bring that to the forefront if we want to inspire and motivate other schools, districts, and educators to change.
I remember, I started teaching in 2002 and we talked more about goals. And then somehow the word standard came in. And I don't know what happened to the word goal, because I do set goals for my classroom of different things that I want to see happen. But I think that there are many educators, if I said, what are the goals for your classroom this year? They might point to the standards. Is that good, bad? What kind of goals should we be setting?
Well, I'm not going to say if it's good or bad. It's just the nature of the beast. It's a reality. And that has to be weaved into some of the goals, because ultimately that is how we are judged in education. But, as I mentioned before, it has to be a combination of qualitative and quantitative measures in order to get away from the focus on standards, curriculum, and data. We have to paint a picture of what are those other things that our learners, our teachers, and our administrators are now able to do in a digital age to actually show whether there's improvement in outcomes or changes to professional practice. And that's why throughout the book, it really talks about leadership dispositions. Leadership is about action. It's not about title, position, or power. What are those leadership dispositions that we have to focus on that aren't going to really change? But in turn, how does technology support and enhance the work that we do? So coming back to the piece about the standards, whether you're a teacher or if you're an administrator and you're all concerned about the data, yes, you still have to paint that picture of how you're improving those outcomes for kids, because that's what your stakeholders want. But what are those other things that you can showcase through the power of storytelling, student work, looking at how we're changing assessment, giving better feedback, looking at what kids are able to create, looking at what adults are now able to do in terms of connecting with their peers near and far. All these themes and elements are threaded throughout the book, aligned to not only research, but practical examples of what it actually looks like in real classrooms that are faced with the challenges that we're all up against.
Well, and I'll give you an example of how I would measure success. Yesterday was our junior job shadow day, and one of my students who's in my digital film class goes to a local company that makes films for businesses, for YouTube, for TV, and that sort of thing. Well, she already knew Adobe Premiere. She already had a portfolio, and she left her 6-hour job shadow experience with a job for the summer, and I have to wonder if somebody measured me on, did I teach this or that, or in terms of digital film versus she was good enough to get a job, that has to come in there somewhere.
And that is exactly what I'm talking about. And it's how we use digital tools to create assets, whether it's text, hyperlinks, images, videos, that paints that picture of, in your case, yeah, Vicki, you know what the curriculum is. You're covering these concepts, but here's what the kid was able to do with it. And that shows that example, which you kind of weaved in perfectly, moving away from kids telling us what they know to showing us they understand. By this student being able to get a job, she was able to understand at such a deeper, more relevant level that really that's what kids are going to, be focused on. When we think about us as students, we didn't celebrate the teachers where we got the A's. Heck, we don't even remember all the assessments that we got A's. We remember how the teacher or the school made us feel. That's the whole premise of this is how do we build an innovative culture? How do we not prepare kids for something, but prepare kids for anything? In order to move from preparing kids for something to anything, we have to get away from a focus on tradition, mandates. I'm not saying that we don't address it, but more energy has to be spent on the whole child and creating these cultures of excellence.
Yes, I recently had someone on the show who was talking about that as they study schools, they're finding that some of the best teaching is happening in the electives where they've relaxed the quote standards a little bit and there's freedom to teach in different ways and in more relevant ways. So the book is Digital Leadership and the second edition is coming out. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Vicki.
Thank you for listening to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast. You can download the show notes and see the archive at coolcatteacher.com/podcast. Never stop learning.